Have you ever noticed how the smartest person you knew didn't fall? They vanished, not slowly, cleanly. That friend from college who saw patterns before anyone else? The coworker who asked the questions that made meetings uncomfortable? One day they quit. No farewell. Social media gone, silence, and everyone whispers the same thing. Such potential, what a waste. But no one asks the real question. What if disappearing was not a loss but a decision? You felt it too, the urge to pull back, to stop explaining yourself, to stop translating your thoughts into something smaller so others feel safe. You told yourself it was burnout, or weakness, or maybe arrogance. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It didn't feel like collapse. It felt like relief. So let's change the frame, not a breakdown, an experiment. What happens if you stop playing the role that keeps you visible but hollow? What happens if you step off the stage instead of begging for a better spotlight? This is the tension most people avoid. Comfort versus freedom. Belonging versus truth. History keeps leaving clues. Carl Jung didn't fade away. He withdrew on purpose. He built a stone tower far from the noise, brick by brick with his own hands, not to escape reality, but to finally meet it without interruption. Grigory Perelman solved a problem the world chased for a century, refused the money, and walked away. Bobby Fischer reached the peak of chess and then burned every bridge behind him. Emily Dickinson barely left her room, yet rewired how language breathes. Different fields, same move. Notice the pattern. They didn't climb higher. They stepped sideways, out of the current. And that should bother you because society sells a single script. Rise, perform, be seen. But intelligence often pulls in the opposite direction. Toward silence, toward precision, toward fewer people, not more. Here's the risky part to admit. The world doesn't reward depth. It tolerates it briefly, as long as it's useful. Then it asks you to simplify, to repeat, to become predictable. And the moment you refuse, the cost becomes social, not financial. You're no longer easy, you're no longer fun, you're no longer invited. So some people don't rebel loudly, they exit quietly. This isn't a philosophy, it's a strategy question. What do you protect when everything around you is optimized for noise? Status versus sanity. Visibility versus control. Most people choose comfort without noticing the trade. A few choose freedom and pay up front. And here's the open loop you can't ignore. If disappearing isn't failure, what exactly are intelligent people protecting when they step away? And what would happen if you stopped calling that instinct a flaw? Because Jung didn't just observe this pattern. He found the mechanism behind it. And once you see it, you can't unsee how early it started shaping you. Watch how people speak at a dinner table. Same phrases, same jokes, same opinions, delivered with confidence. Now notice something quieter. No one pauses to ask where those thoughts came from. You've done this too. Repeated an opinion that felt like yours, until one day it didn't. That moment is uncomfortable. Because if the thought wasn't yours, what else isn't? Jung noticed this long before social media, before algorithms. Most people don't choose their ideas, they inherit them. Culture installs the software. Advertising sets the desires. Authority provides the answers. And the dangerous part is not the control. It's the invisibility of it. Here's the riskier truth. People who live inside this system don't feel trapped. They feel normal, safe, certain. And certainty is addictive. You felt that pull too, the relief of agreeing, the comfort of blending in, until something in you started resisting. So change the frame. This isn't about being smarter. It's an experiment. What happens when you stop accepting thoughts just because they arrive fully formed? What happens when you test them instead of using them? Noise versus signal, discomfort versus freedom. Some people can't stop this process once it starts. They question inherited beliefs. They notice patterns others defend. They see that what everyone calls reality is often just repetition with confidence. Jung called this individuation, but don't turn it into an idea yet. Treat it like a behavior. You stop nodding automatically. You pause before agreeing. You become harder to predict. And that's where friction appears. Pay attention to reactions. When someone is stronger than you respect them. When someone is richer, you compare yourself. But when someone thinks more clearly, something else happens. The room tightens. Jokes turn sharp. Smiles become thin. You've felt this shift. Maybe you caused it without trying. Here's the uncomfortable mechanism. When people feel intellectually exposed, their brain doesn't debate. It defends. Fear lights up. Not metaphorically, physically. Their system reacts as if something valuable is under attack. Because it is, their self-image. An intelligent presence doesn't argue, it reflects. It shows gaps without naming them. And humans protect their ego the way they protect their body. Instinctively, aggressively. That's why history keeps repeating the same move. Not quiet disagreement, removal. Socrates didn't lose a debate. He made people feel seen in ways they couldn't tolerate. Galileo didn't fail intellectually. He disrupted certainty. Alan Turing wasn't rejected for incompetence, but for difference that couldn't be absorbed. Notice the escalation. First discomfort, then ridicule, then isolation, then punishment. So here's the open question you're not supposed to ask. If clarity triggers threat, what does that mean for anyone who refuses to dull themselves to fit in? And more importantly, what strategy lets you keep your mind without becoming a target? Because this isn't the end of the pattern. It's the beginning of how intelligent people decide whether to disappear or learn how to move unseen while staying free. You've seen it happen in real time. You say one careful sentence, not provocative, just precise. The room goes quiet. Someone shifts in their chair. A joke appears to change the subject. Later you hear you're too intense or overthinking. You didn't attack anyone. But something still broke. You've felt that moment land in your body. The split second where you wonder if you should have stayed silent. If it would have been easier to nod and move on. That hesitation is the price. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The cost isn't paid once. It's paid every day. So let's reframe this. Not as miscommunication, as an experiment. What happens when your thinking arrives faster and deeper than the room can handle? Do others stretch upward and stir? Or do they push the source away? Essential versus noise. Precision versus comfort. Most people don't realize what's happening. When they meet thinking they can't match, their mind doesn't try to learn. It tries to stabilize, to remove friction. And friction often has a face. Yours. The reaction isn't logical, it's defensive, silence, labels, distance. You've watched it unfold without anyone naming it. This is the hidden workload of being sharp in a dull environment. Every conversation becomes translation. You don't speak as you think. You downscale, you compress, you shave off edges so the idea can pass through without triggering alarms. You turn systems into anecdotes. Probabilities into certainties, depth into something flat enough to be accepted. And here's the risk no one warns you about. You're not just simplifying speech, you're simplifying thought. Over time, the shortcut becomes the route. Your mind adapts downward. Muscles weaken when they're never loaded. So does thinking, slowly, quietly, safely. That's the loneliness Jung pointed to. Not the absence of people, the absence of resonance. Being surrounded and still alone because what matters most never leaves your mouth intact. Jung hit that wall himself. His ideas grew too wide, too layered, too strange for polite discussion. So he stopped negotiating. He didn't argue louder. He stepped away. He built a tower with his own hands, stone after stone. No audience, no translation, just thought aloud to breathe at full size. People called it withdrawal, instability, collapse. But look closer. It was calibration. Removing noise to hear what remained. Freedom over comfort. So here's the open question that should unsettle you. If constant translation slowly erodes your mind, what's the smarter strategy? Keep shrinking to stay included, or change the environment where your thinking can operate at full strength. Because this isn't about disappearing, it's about choosing where your mind is allowed to stay alive. And the most important part of that decision hasn't been said yet. You can feel the moment it starts. A conversation where you're already bored before it finishes. You shorten your answer. You skip the real thought. You smile at the right time. Again and again. At first it feels polite. Then it feels heavy. You know this feeling. The quiet question that shows up late at night. Why am I doing this? What am I actually getting from these interactions? Be honest. The answer stings. Approval, access, maybe safety, but no growth, no relief, no truth. So shift the frame. This isn't social fatigue. It's an experiment running too long. What happens when you compress yourself for years just to stay readable? Freedom versus comfort. Clarity versus acceptance. Eventually, the cost becomes visible. Translation stops being a skill and turns into exhaustion. You're not tired of people. You're tired of performing for them. And one day, the performance stops making sense. Not dramatically, calmly. You withdraw. Not because you lost, because you finally calculated the return. Jung had a word for the mask you use to survive this, the persona, the version of you that fits the room. For most people, that mask is thin, easy to wear. It almost feels like skin. But for a sharp mind, the gap grows wider every year. The role demands certainty where you see probability, simplicity where you see systems, agreement where you see risk. Wearing that mask isn't tiring because it's fake. It's tiring because it blocks perception. You start hiding questions before they form. You swallow observations the moment they appear. You pretend not to notice patterns that are obvious to you. Not once, daily. Picture a meeting. Someone presents a plan. You spot 5 failures immediately, not subtle ones, structural ones. You've seen this movie before. But you remember what happened last time you spoke up. The looks, the labels. Difficult, negative, not aligned. So you stay quiet. The plan passes. You already know how it ends. And something small shuts it down inside you. This doesn't happen once, it happens constantly. Each time you choose the mask over your mind, you trade truth for permission. At first it feels strategic. Later it feels empty. Eventually it becomes dangerous, because after enough repetitions, a new question appears. If I keep choosing the persona, who exactly am I without it? That's the part no one warns you about. The mask doesn't just hide you from others. It hides you from yourself. And the longer you wear it, the harder it is to remember what was underneath. Here's the open loop you shouldn't rush past. If high-functioning minds spend hours every day acting normal, what is that effort protecting? And what is it quietly destroying? Because disappearance doesn't start with isolation. It starts with awareness. And once that awareness locks in, the next move isn't obvious yet. That's where the real strategy begins. You don't notice it at first, but it's a second job. The extra shift. smiling at the right moments, softening every sentence, pretending to be less than you are so the room stays calm. You clock in every morning without realizing it. You know the moment it breaks, the day you feel tired before the conversation even starts, not bored, drained, and the honest thought appears, sharp and dangerous. I don't remember who I am when I'm not performing, so shift the frame. This isn't escape, it's a test. What happens if you stop acting long enough to see what's left? Freedom versus approval, being versus fitting. That's why withdrawal happens. Not in panic, in precision. You step back to recover your shape, to stop managing reactions and start thinking again. Jung did exactly this. He removed himself from the rooms that demanded simplicity and built an environment that could hold complexity, stone by stone, not running away, rebuilding from the inside out. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. There's something you trigger without trying. When you enter a room, people don't just hear your words. They feel a comparison they didn't ask for. Gaps appear. Shortcuts become obvious. Half-formed thoughts feel exposed. And instead of facing that, the mind protects itself. So the discomfort needs a target. You get labeled arrogant, cold, pretentious, not because of what you said, but because of what your presence reflected. You didn't claim superiority, you didn't assert dominance, you simply stayed at your natural level. And that was enough. Notice how strange that is. Accusations without actions, judgments without evidence. You've seen it, you've lived it, that's projection. People exporting what they don't want to face and pinning it on you. And managing this takes energy, constantly. You're not defending ideas. You're buffering other people's psychology, explaining yourself when you did nothing, shrinking so their inner tension quiets down. Eventually, that exhaustion outweighs the benefit of staying visible. There's another turn the mind takes once patterns become clear. Conversations start to repeat before they happen. You know the objections in advance, the jokes, the judgments. Not because you're cynical, because most interactions follow scripts, not thought. And here's the quiet danger. Predictability kills curiosity. When every exchange becomes a loop, the mind starves. Not from lack of people, but from lack of novelty. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. You hear judgment where thinking should be, reactions where reflection should be, and the room starts to feel small. So here's the open question you're meant to sit with. If staying visible means managing everyone else's defenses, what's the smarter move? Keep paying the cost? Or design a life where your mind doesn't have to apologize for existing, because disappearing isn't the final step. It's a transition. And the most important mechanism behind it hasn't surfaced yet. You notice it mid-sentence. Someone is speaking with confidence, but you already know every word that's coming next. Same opinions, same phrasing, same certainty. They think they're original. You feel the boredom before they finish. You've been here too many times. Another political debate where everyone repeats their side like a script. Another relationship talk like built from the same 3 books. And the uncomfortable thought appears. I've had this exact conversation before. Not once, dozens of times with different faces, same mind. That realization lands hard. Because intelligence doesn't crave agreement, it craves surprise. New links, ideas that bend, clash, evolve. And once you start seeing human behavior clearly, most interactions offer none of that, just loops. So shift the frame. This isn't arrogance, it's pattern recognition, an experiment in attention. Where does your mind actually come alive? Predictability versus discovery, noise versus essence. This is why Jung chose books over parties, not because he hated people, because the dead could still challenge him, Nietzsche could still shock him, Kant could still resist him. But the average dinner conversation, fully mapped before dessert. Ask yourself honestly, why spend hours inside a script you can already recite when solitude opens doors that haven't been touched yet? Here's where the truth sharpens. Society isn't built to reward intelligence. It's built to protect stability. Stability needs sameness. Intelligence disrupts it, not loudly, quietly, by asking the wrong questions, by seeing through comforting stories, by noticing cracks others depend on. So society doesn't attack intelligence directly. That would expose the fear. Instead, it uses softer weapons, labels, tone policing, social friction. You're not a culture fit. You're too intense. You're overthinking. The message is clean and consistent. Adjust yourself or step aside. And here's the risk to admit. Most people will choose familiarity over truth, even when truth would help them. The brain prefers what it already knows. New ideas feel like threats, not gifts. So the first response to anything original is ridicule, or dismissal, or silence. That's why innovators are punished early, why sharp minds struggle while alive and get praised when they're gone. Once intelligence is no longer dangerous, society suddenly calls it genius. Notice the escalation. First boredom, then isolation, then a deeper question. If society only accepts intelligence when it's harmless, what does that mean for anyone who's still thinking in real time? That's the open loop. Because once you see this pattern, you can't go back to pretending conversations are random. And the next move isn't withdrawal yet, it's strategy. The part where you decide whether to keep feeding the machine or build a space where your mind can finally encounter something unpredictable again. During his life, they called him unscientific, too symbolic, too strange. The same ideas that sit in textbooks today were laughed out of academic rooms back then. So he stepped away. Not loudly, quietly. He left institutions and built a place where no one could interrupt the work. The ideas that made him permanent required him to become unseen first. That detail matters more than people admit. Look around now. Every pressure that pushed him into isolation has multiplied. Depth loses to speed. Thought loses to reaction. You feel it every time you hesitate before speaking because the real answer won't fit the format. Here's the uncomfortable choice you face. Shrink your thinking into fragments that travel fast, or stay whole and stay ignored. Simplicity versus truth, visibility versus integrity. Watch what spreads. Short claims, loud certainty, moral heat. Now compare that to how a serious mind actually works. Careful steps, conditions, doubt, context. None of it fits cleanly on modern platforms. The system doesn't punish intelligence directly, it just makes it inefficient. And here's the risk to admit, it's not personal. Algorithms don't hate you. They reward what's easy to digest. False ideas travel faster because they're lighter. Truth moves slower because it carries weight. So the smarter your thinking becomes, the more friction you experience just trying to share it. You've probably felt the pull to go quiet. Post less, speak less, explain less. Not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it properly costs too much. Workplaces repeat the same pattern. They say they want innovation, but only inside safe borders. Improve the system. Don't question it. The moment you point at the structure instead of the surface, something shifts. You're not aligned, not a culture fit. You didn't fail. You became inconvenient. This is why some people don't fight to stay visible. They step out. Think about Perlman. He solved a problem that stood for a century. The world rushed to reward him, medals, money, applause. He refused all of it and disappeared, not because he was unstable, because he understood the trade. Accept the spotlight and spend your life performing the solution, or keep your mind free and walk away. That decision scares people, so they label it madness. But look at the pattern. The work that changes the world rarely comes from the center of it. Newton didn't do his deepest thinking in committees or conferences. He did it in isolation when the noise stopped and the questions could stretch fully. So here's the open loop you can't ignore. If every system today rewards speed over depth, what kind of mind survives by staying visible? And what kind of work can only be done once you step out of view? Because disappearance isn't the end of intelligence. It's often the condition for its next leap. And the most important part of that leap hasn't been named yet. Picture the routine. Darwin walking the same paths on his family land for years. Notebooks filling while the world stayed distant. Kant following the same daily schedule, never straying far from his town. Thinking deeper than anyone who traveled farther. Emily Dickinson upstairs, door closed, writing lines no one around her could hear. Tesla alone in a hotel room, feeding pigeons ignored by the city that now worships his name. You notice the pattern before anyone explains it. The work that lasted came from distance. The recognition came later. Too late. That lands uncomfortably if you're paying attention. Because the same world that praises these minds now would have called them antisocial, unproductive, strange. And you felt that label hover near you too. So shift the frame. This isn't tragedy, it's a test. What does society do with a mind that doesn't fit its rhythm? Tolerance versus suppression. Visibility versus survival. Jung noticed this repeat everywhere. Living intelligence is rarely celebrated. At best, it's tolerated. Often, it's pressured to conform. And once it's harmless, once it's silent, it's packaged and praised. The individuated mind pays first. Society benefits later. If this sounds familiar, pay attention to what's already happening to you. After social events, you're not energized. You're empty. Conversations don't spark you. They drain you. Invitations start to feel optional, then unnecessary. You turn them down without guilt and feel relief instead of fear. At work, you function, you perform well, but something feels distant. The tasks don't stretch you. Meetings repeat themselves. You go quiet, not because you lack thoughts, but because explaining them feels like wasted effort. You spend more time alone and notice something strange. You're calmer, clearer, less tense, not lonely, lighter. Here's the uncomfortable truth. These aren't signs of weakness, they're signals. Your mind is asking for conditions it rarely gets, depth instead of noise, space instead of stimulation, freedom instead of constant adjustment. Research eventually caught up to what Jung observed. Highly intelligent people don't gain the same reward from constant social interaction. The input doesn't match the wiring. It's not pathology, it's mismatch. And here's the escalation most people avoid. If your mind is built differently, the default environment will always feel wrong. Not hostile every day, just slowly corrosive. So the real question isn't whether you'll step back. If you're genuinely perceptive, that pull is already there. The real question is how. Do you drift away without understanding why, feeling broken and isolated? Or do you step back deliberately, designing space where your thinking can breathe? That's the choice Jung pointed to. And the answer isn't disappearance, it's control, because what comes next isn't retreat. It's the phase where intelligence stops apologizing for its needs and starts building the conditions for its next move. You notice the pull before you explain it. Fewer messages answered, Fewer rooms entered. Not because you're failing, but because something inside you refuses to keep shrinking. You don't feel lost, you feel precise. That's the part people misunderstand. Withdrawal isn't collapse, it's correction. Here's the uncomfortable truth you're circling around. The system doesn't ask you to succeed as yourself. It asks you to function as a simplified version that fits. Speak faster, think flatter, perform clarity even when the truth is layered. If you follow that path perfectly, you still lose. You just fail quietly. You fail to become who you are. You fail to do the work only you could do. So change the frame. This isn't escape from failure. It's refusal to participate in a rigged outcome. Performance versus authenticity. Visibility versus depth. That's why intelligent people step back, not in fear, in strength. They choose to become invisible rather than inaccurate. And in that invisibility, something finally starts. Look at Jung's life when it mattered most. After the break that cost him status and allies, he didn't rush to explain himself. He withdrew. He built a place by hand, stone after stone, where no one demanded he be smaller. And inside that space, the ideas that changed psychology took shape. None of them would have survived inside polite boundaries. His disappearance wasn't the end of his contribution. It was the condition for it. Now turn the lens back on yourself. What are you actually losing when you step away? Conversations that never surprised you. Meetings where the outcome was decided before anyone spoke. Social rituals that required you to act interested instead of being alive. Approval from people who never really saw you. And what appears in the space you reclaim? Long stretches of uninterrupted thought. Work that goes deep instead of wide. Silence that sharpens instead of numbs. The relief of not translating yourself every minute. That trade is the experiment. Comfort versus freedom. Noise versus essence. If you're feeling this pull, it's not weakness asking for rest. It's your mind demanding conditions that has been denied. Others will worry. They'll call it unhealthy. They'll say, you're disappearing. Let them. They're measuring by a scale that was never built for you. You'll know what's actually happening. You're not stepping out of life. You're stepping into the only version of it where your full intelligence is allowed to operate. The world doesn't need another person sanding themselves down to keep things smooth. It needs minds that can go the distance, not just stay visible. And that work requires distance. Space. Deliberate withdrawal. So don't vanish by accident. Build your tower on purpose. You start by noticing where your energy goes quiet. A room where no one asks you to be smaller. A stretch of time where nothing demands performance. It feels strange at first, almost wrong. Then your breathing slows. You felt the opposite too. Conversations that take more than they give. Relationships that require constant translation. Work that rewards agreement instead of contribution. You stay polite, you stay capable, and something essential keeps getting postponed. Here's the risk to say out loud. Explaining yourself to people who will never understand isn't patience. It's erosion. So change the frame. This isn't about quitting life. It's an experiment in subtraction. What happens when you remove what drains you instead of fixing it? Comfort versus clarity, acceptance versus contribution. History leaves a quiet trail here. Some people stepped out of the main current and didn't come back the same. Jung withdrew from the center of psychology and later defined it. Dickinson stepped away from society and, her words, outlived everyone who ignored her. They didn't vanish because they couldn't function. They vanished because functioning there required betrayal. That detail matters. Thriving inside a broken system often means failing at what actually matters. You gain visibility, you lose yourself. Here's the uncomfortable shift. In a sick environment, being seen isn't success. It's participation. Applause doesn't mean alignment. Sometimes it just means you're harmless enough to be tolerated. So, withdrawal becomes precise, not dramatic. You stop chasing rooms that never held you. You stop negotiating with people who only hear noise. You choose fewer inputs, more depth, less explanation, and something opens. The work you do there won't trend. It won't be immediately recognized. It might not even be legible to most people, but it will be honest. And honest work compounds quietly. That's the open loop most people avoid. If the work that lasts is often done unseen, what does that say about the spaces you're fighting to stay visible in? This isn't a call to hide. It's a call to reappear somewhere else. To yourself first. So step back with intent. Build a place where your thinking can stretch without permission. Let the noise fade. Let the depth return. Because intelligent people don't disappear to escape society. They disappear to finally meet themselves without distortion.